Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Growth Class. I'm your host, Phil Masiello, and today's guest is a founder who quite literally disrupting the baby food aisle to solve a global health crisis. Jaxon is the co-founder and co-CEO of Mission MightyMe. After a 20-year career in investment banking and private equity, his professional life took a massive turn due to a personal family challenge when his oldest daughter developed severe food allergies. JJ and his wife, Catherine, they realized that the very products parents needed to prevent allergies simply didn't exist. So he started partnering with the world's leading pediatric allergists. They launched Mission MightyMe to turn groundbreaking science into a household staple. And today, they're scaling nationwide, including the recent launch at the Target, charging and changing how a generation of parents think about infant nutrition. And it's important, and I've said this before, for brands entering retail. When and I actually just wrote a post about this morning because there was an article in Inc. magazine about this very thing, about how, founders always want to get into retail, and that's the first step. They get in, but staying on the shelf is really the hard part. And when you go in, when I coach founders, when you're going in when you're trying to unseat an incumbent, you just have a Me Too product, you're much more vulnerable. So here we've got a guy who's going in, he's got a great product, it's totally unique, he's got no competition in the space. He's going to succeed in scaling this at retail. So JJ, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on and taking the time to share.
No, I'm so glad to be here, Phil. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you just take us back, give us a little bit of history into the what, the how, and the why you did what you did.
Well, sure, and thank you. That actually was a great intro, and I appreciate that very much. Like a lot of founders, our founding story comes from a personal pain point. We have three kids, and our oldest is allergic to nuts. When she was born, the pediatric feeding guidelines said do not feed babies any nuts until they're 3 years old, and we followed those guidelines to a T. She had a walnut at 3 years old, and had a terrifying, horrible reaction. And after proper testing and so forth, we knew that she was allergic to nuts and probably would be for life. And you just adjust accordingly as parents when something like this happens. But our third child was born in 2015, and that was the year that groundbreaking research was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that withholding these foods like nuts from our kids' diets when they're infants was actually just the worst thing we could possibly do. And that in fact, withholding those foods from their diet increases their likelihood of developing an allergy fivefold. So as parents, we would have we wanted to do anything we could to keep our little guy from having a food allergy like his big sister. And it sounded so simple. Just feed babies nuts. No big deal, right? And I remember at the time thinking how amazing it was that something so simple could solve such a big problem. But when he turned 6 months old and it was right on time to introduce nuts into his diets and keep them in the diet, we realized how difficult of a task that actually was.
Right.
And no one was more motivated than us to prevent him from having an allergy like Big Sister. But what we found is that we had peanut butter in the pantry, but a 6 month old with no teeth, they can't even eat peanut butter. It's a choking hazard.
Right,
And
right.
so we were diluting it with water and making peanut soup, but it was messy and difficult, and we were busy working parents and couldn't really keep up with it. It felt like medicine, trying to get it in there, consistently like you're supposed to. And our daughter's allergic to all the tree nuts, and so I remember us having this moment, looking at each other and thinking, well, gosh, how in the world do we get cashew in his diet 3 times a week? How do we get walnut in there? And one night, in our kitchen, out of frustration, my wife Catherine held up a canister of rice puffs that are in every diaper bag in the country, and our kids were eating, and they do nothing for the kids because for the most part they're just all rice. And she held up one of those containers of puffs and a container of this mixed nut butter that we were trying to get our son to eat, and he didn't like the taste of, and well, and wouldn't eat it. And she said, I have these, these puffs do nothing for our kids, but they love them, and we've got this mixed nut butter that he needs to eat. Why can't someone just put these two together? And that's really, that was the light bulb moment. It was out of sheer frustration. We, as a food allergy parents, we knew the problem was acute and vast. Nowadays, 1 out of every 13 kids in the United States has a food allergy. And so we knew it was a big problem. We knew the research was super clear, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, peer reviewed, NIH funded trials, top notch, people solving the problem. But there just was no simple way for it to actually be implemented. So it took us a couple years before we decided that we were the ones to solve the problem. But once that moment came, we got to work.
And, was it I mean, obviously, you can't manufacture that yourselves, so were there issues trying to find manufacturers?
It was actually very difficult, and Phil, I can confirm that it is virtually impossible to bake puffs in your own oven
Yeah.
because we tried and they were terrible. Um, but, in fact, we learned, relatively quickly that we needed a partner, to be able to make this and to be able to make it well and to be able to make it according to spec for an infant, and toddlers, and partners that would take quality control as seriously as we would as parents. And that was one of the biggest challenges that we had in getting started. You know, recognizing that what we were trying to do was the exact opposite of an entire industry. And there was so much fear in the manufacturing community around bringing peanuts and tree nuts into a facility, that it was very difficult to find someone who had the expertise that we wanted to make a puff that was suitable for babies, but that would also be willing and able, based on their other contracts, to bring nuts in the facility.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine because we do a tremendous amount of work in the food business and everybody's got that on their label. This was manufactured in a facility that had no nuts and we do a lot in the space of organic and I mean it's incredible. And then just on a personal level, just so many people freak out about, nuts and um I can remember one client we had that it's a hot sauce client, and people kept asking if this was manufactured in a place with nuts, and we were managing their social, and it was coming up on the social, and we're thinking, What? Where would there be nuts? And we're making hot sauce. I mean, we're manufacturing hot sauce. And it's like you're going, really? I mean, everybody is so freaked out about nuts, and I never knew like, I guess, growing up, I never met people that had nut allergies when I was growing up. And then all of a sudden in the last, 15 years, you just hear nut allergies everywhere. So I would imagine it's probably because, like you said, people were restricting nuts when kids were young. I can remember, we didn't restrict nuts when I was a kid. I was eating nuts when I
That's
was
right.
young.
Yep. Yeah, in the year 2000, the American Academy of Pediatrics published guidelines, um, with good intentions. They had noticed a slight increase in food allergies, and they thought that maybe it would be better to wait until the immune system was more developed, to introduce common food allergens. But the decision was made with no research, and it was done by a committee that didn't even include kind of the top researchers in the field on the topic. So it was a policy of good intention, but not good research, or any research at all. And so there were a lot of consequences, and that was in 2000 when that those guidelines were first put in place, and since then the rate of nut allergies has quadrupled.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you see it on the airplanes all the time because people complain, "Oh, well, they don't even serve nuts anymore, really." It's all, and I'm not complaining about that because they have the brownie crunch that they serve a lot, which I think is really tasty, but, anyway.
Well, one day we hope to be at a point we can see it where nut allergies are so scarce that we no longer have to have restricted spaces for them to be in. And we're not there yet because they are, and as a father of a child with nut allergies, we know that, they can be severe, they can be scary.
Sure.
And so we empathize with that. But, if we can, you know, through our mission, bring down the rate of nut allergies as much as the research would suggest we can just through, making feeding kids nuts, from 6 months and beyond, just the normal thing that you do, then one day we can see when those sorts of restrictions may no longer be needed.
Yeah. And how's the reception been? Both from
The
consumers
reception's been
and the
really
industry.
good, and I can tell you that, early days, it required a lot of education, and, I know, with if other founders are listening or, people tune in to, kinda hear about people's journeys, one of the things that's been really important for us is timing because, there was certainly a possibility that we could have gone too early when people weren't really ready for it. When big changes come in place through research or feeding guidelines or whatever it may be, it can take a while before a broad community or a whole society is willing to make the changes that are necessary for your product to work. And I think that was the case with us. The research was published in 2015. We got to work in late 2017. Spent a couple, 2.5 years in development, launched in 2020. And even then in 2020, the reception was always encouraging. People seemed to understand the research. It was intuitive, when it really came down to it. Like, look, these kids need these foods in their diets early because the immune system is learning from day one. And instead of, keeping the immune system from interacting with these foods and then being scared of it later, if you can get them in the diet early, the immune system learns that it's nourishing food that it shouldn't fight. That's essentially what's happening. But these things do take time, and so we started off very slowly in e-commerce, and it required a lot of education. And the guidelines changed in 2017, and slowly over years, the word was getting out to pediatricians, and pediatricians were getting the word out to new moms and dads. New moms and dads were talking with their friends that are new moms and dads, and word of mouth was a big factor here too. And now we're at a point now where we feel like most new parents now know that they need to get nuts in the diets, and they're looking for a solution.
Yeah. Is it difficult getting it into retail? Into retailers?
Early
Yeah.
days, it would have been difficult getting into retail, we think, but we think it would have been more difficult to get the velocity that's needed to keep it in retail. When we first launched in 2020, we launched in March of 2020, right when the entire world shut down for COVID-19. That's a whole other story for another day, probably. But brand discovery on shelf went to zero as people were going in the grocery store looking for paper towels and milk and then getting out of there. Nobody was looking at a new brand and figuring out what they were up to. So there was some kind of slowness there at the very beginning, and we were lucky that while we had launched then, we hadn't launched anything significant in retail, and so we were able to just stay in e-commerce. And there were some brands that had some retail reception, some other brands that were kind of doing it a little differently. Um, but I think our timing ended up being, really good because Now we're at a point where, as I mentioned before, it's much more. It's not 100% common knowledge, that's for sure,
Right.
but it's a much higher percentage than when we first launched our product in 2020, and we could tell we were having to educate people. And now we feel like there are a lot more people that are coming to look for the solution versus us having to go find them and explain the importance of what we were doing. Um, at this point now, one of the best things for our retail rollout is that a lot of the retailers, very smartly, their buyers for the baby aisle are moms. And
Right.
they're moms of young, young kids, in some cases, infants and toddlers. And so when we talk with them, it's at this point now, most of them have heard of us as a parent, and they understand virtually immediately what we're doing and why it's such a huge pain point for parents that needs a solution.
So on a different note altogether, just because I'm curious, did your background in analysis of, for VC and PE, help you in developing this business?
It certainly helped in that I knew how to build a spreadsheet and I knew how to come up with a forecast. It helped in maybe project management of some sort, like thinking through from one step to another. Um, but it was in every other aspect, and there are so many aspects. In every other aspect, I knew nothing, and I'm very comfortable saying that. And we knew virtually nothing about product development. We knew virtually nothing about um, getting on shelf in retailers. We literally knew nothing about e-commerce. My wife and co-founder Catherine had built an incredible career as a journalist, and is exceptionally good at writing and messaging, but a lot of things were very new to us on the marketing front. Branding was
Sure.
brand new to us. We knew nothing about digital marketing. I knew nothing about ingredient procurement. We knew nobody in the industry. So the background did help somewhat in being able to try to chart what a course might look like, but every other aspect was starting from literally zero.
Yeah. 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 I just wondered if, because I do a lot of coaching and a lot of mentoring, and I'm involved in University of Maryland School of Entrepreneurship and Johns Hopkins, et cetera, and and some of the accelerator programs and things. And we always have, private equity people and venture capital people come in to talk about how, how startups should structure their business to raise capital. And I always wondered if, they thought about, okay, I'm doing this myself now. Am I focused on my minimum viable product, my product market fit? How big is the addressable market? How am I building it towards that? I always wondered if because I have met a couple of private equity guys, small guys who worked for bigger companies that spun out on their own and started acquiring brands
Hmm.
and putting them
Sure.
together. But they still don't. I mean, they understand the financial part of it, but they just never understand the marketing, the messaging, the advertising. That's always the stumbling block.
Well, I that doesn't surprise me one bit, because I can assure you from my perspective, that I have learned so much through this process that
Sure.
I now appreciate just so much more. Having been in the seat and building and building teams and everything that's required to go from an idea to something that is a solution on a shelf. And one of the things that's really important in through the process, or at least was for me, is is a humility that's required when you go into something and you have a moment where you realize I actually know nothing about this. And the first step, at least for me, was, in understanding that, was to try to find people that were in the industry and had that experience, and could help us really think through the right steps and to find the right people, to be able to, really help us get going, and to be able to do it, in a way that, could be sustainable, and building a foundation that we could really grow from, and to try to do everything right. We just knew that we needed to find people, and Phil, I'm sure you and also your listeners, that are in the food industry know that it's an incredible industry with a very just a rich ecosystem of people that are willing to help, or people that are just willing to give a little advice. And so I always encourage people to try to find the helpers, because people are out there that are willing to help. And then the other thing I would say that I've learned on our journey, going from knowing nothing about the industry, is that sometimes you just have to think about what the next step needs to be. You
Yeah.
know, you can try to look 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, but in some respects, for us, sometimes it was just, the next step is I need to find somebody who understands manufacturing of food product, and start there. And then, one step at a time, and just every day trying to put one foot in front of the other, and make a little progress.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. That's how we really started, our 3 core areas of focus in our company is beauty, personal care, and food, and we came out of the food business, and, I founded, a couple of food brands and things, along the way, and it's amazing, um, it's amazing how what you can get done when you start talking to people and figuring and explaining what you're trying to do. Sam Altman, because so many founders, I find they're so afraid to share their idea because they think somebody's going to steal it. And Sam Altman from AI said, from ChatGPT said, he said, look, he gave a speech to Y Combinator and he said, you know, stop it. Stop with the NDAs. Stop keeping it close to the vest. Nobody cares about your idea as much as you do, and you're not going to hear anything. You're not going to get help. You're not going to do anything if you're shoving NDAs in people's faces. Nobody cares and nobody's going to steal your idea because it all comes down to execution. Nobody has the vision like you do. They're not going to go, oh, that's a great idea. Let me go steal it, and I think that those are great words because it's the truth. Nobody knows your idea as well as you do. Nobody knows what you're trying to get to. But when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to advertising, you have to start talking to people and then you try and figure out who's best suited to help you. So,
I absolutely agree with that. And, at least in our experience, um, nobody is going to have the uh, emotional attachment to the
right.
idea like you will. And that emotional attachment to the idea, I think, is actually critical to it working, because it's just so hard. The journey is so difficult that if it's not your idea and you're emotionally attached to it, it's just not going to work. And so I completely agree. The likelihood of someone, kind of stealing an idea and going to make it work is, to me, is just, virtually non-existent. And you have to be out there and talk to people, and learn from others and get help along the way.
Yeah. That's a great way to end this conversation because we're out of time. But you know, it's rare to see a business or a startup so closely tied to a public health mission. I mean, everybody, we deal with so many brands that are, mission driven, right? For you could talk about socks, you could talk about, all kinds of things, they're mission driven. But this is really tied to a public health mission. Um, and a parent's, I guess, a parent's determination as well and you're moving an entire industry forward if you think about it. So, I applaud you. I think it's a big undertaking, bold undertaking. It looks like it's going well. Again, I thank you for taking the time to come on and sharing with us. And where can people find you? You're sold on the website missionmightyme.com.
That's right.
And where else can they find the product?
Through e-commerce, we're on missionmightyme.com, Amazon, and Thrive Market. And then in retailers, we're in over 1,300 Targets across the country. We're in almost 1,300 Walmarts now across the country. We're nationwide in Sprouts, and we're launching in Fresh Time and H-E-B and Wegmans here over the next few months. And
Yeah.
hopefully coming to even more retailers around in everybody's neighborhood soon.
That's great. Great. That's great progress. Again, I appreciate you coming on and good luck.
Thank you so much, Phil. Really appreciate it. Thanks for helping us spread the word.
Yeah, my pleasure.